Hello. I read 100 books this year, and I got sad that I don't usually get a chance to talk about books until I remembered that I can do whatever I want forever, so I'm now going to talk to you about my 10 favourite books of the year. A couple of housekeeping things. Firstly, I tried doing this to camera and I could not bring myself to do it. I don't know how people do that, so please enjoy whatever arbitrary footage I end up putting over this. I am a writer and I promise to you I will never get good at video. And then on the book specifically, the top 10 are in alphabetical order, except I saved one for last, not because it's the best, but we'll get to it. And before we start, here are the other 90 books, which I have roughly sorted into stars. I kind of find all rating arbitrary, so we will see how this goes. I don't rate things as I read them, so this is all done in the last day or two. Maybe it's just the mood I'm in. I don't know. Here are some books. Alright, since we're doing this in alphabetical order, the first book on my top 10 list is the last book that I read, which is All Systems Red by Marta Wells. I read this literally last night and I was drinking a lot of gin and tonic, but I knew I was gonna like it and it really surprised me even then. Like, I liked it even more than that. I think that any book that does its thing really specifically and does not hang around and does not add anything else that you don't need is really, really rare. I love a lean book. I love a lean game. I think that most things should be like a third shorter than they actually are, but not All Systems Red. It's already short and it really, really, really makes everything count. And the thing that it does so well is give you a psychological portrait of a person that is just so delicious. I am so excited to read more about Murderbot. I haven't seen the show or anything like that. I definitely want to do more reading before that. I'm definitely more of a books person than a TV person. But it's always nice when you finish a book and then you're like, oh my god, there's so many more of these that I can get into. And not like either, well, that's over, or, oh no, this was the first one in a trilogy and now I have to go and read the other one because it didn't really finish. That annoys me a lot. Anyway, All Systems Red didn't do that, so I'm very happy that there's more to read. Next on my list is Hild by Nicola Griffith. I said on a podcast recording that this might be my book of the year, and I have just committed to not ranking them, so I will not say whether or not that is true. But this book fits with the style of book that I like to read so much, which is like this historical fiction, especially around these like more unusual time periods, or I mean, for me, I just love this like post-Roman Britain that it's set in. It's set in about the 600s. I love this time period for books because there's so little actual evidence there. It gives the writer like a lot of free reign, and yet like there is so much detail in this book, and it is so lovely in how it writes about not just the history but also the world and the natural world specifically. And it has this fascinating thing where, so the main character Hild is a seer and can like predict things in the future, but it actually spells out exactly what she's been paying attention to make those predictions, and it just has this way of making her feel so attentive and like slightly magical, but also like so grounded in this like real attention to detail about the world around her, and it just like fits so well with the narration, and I really, really loved it. This again, actually, there are more of these, which is exciting. This is another one where it's actually exciting. It's the first in a trilogy, and it took the second book 10 years to come out, and the third one isn't out yet, which usually would make me wish that I waited, but I like this one so much that I know I'm going to want to reread it, so it's great. There's also this really heart-wrenching sister relationship in this one that I want to shout out. Hild by Nicola Griffith. I love this one. And then next is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I had to read this for a class that I'm taking, and I'm really glad that it was on the syllabus because I really loved it, and it's not necessarily something that I would have got around to even though it was on my TBR because I've heard so many people talk about it. Martyr is about this guy who has all of these different identities and doesn't know what to do with them all. He's Iranian American, he's a poet who doesn't do a lot of writing, he's incredibly isolated while having some really close relationships. That's like another theme of books that I really like, is like these really, really intimate but like bizarre, like boundary blurring relationships, and this is a really, really good one of those. It has this tension between being very intimate with someone and also very emotionally distant, which I just think fits in so well with everything else in the book, all the other themes that it's exploring. And actually, like, as I was writing this, as I was writing my notes for this, I realized that it actually centers around all the relationships he has in a really interesting way, which is that Cyrus, the main character, shuts himself off from relationships even though they keep being offered to him over and over again. And I think that ties in really nicely to how the whole book is about meaning making, and it has such a nuanced opinion about how we as people make meaning, and it felt really refreshing. I've read this twice for class and I still feel like I could squeeze so much juice from it. Like, I would love to read it again, especially in a few years, and see how like my approach to it has changed. Also, I want to give a special shout out to the ending of this, which I won't spoil, but I think it's such a fascinating ending, and it has this impulse to look up like, oh, what did other people think about this? And unfortunately, I fell for that impulse, and every attempt I've seen to quote unquote explain it has driven me crazy. So I think that's really fun. I think that I like it when things get people talking about stuff, but also when I look at them and I'm just like, wow, I don't agree with any of that. So it really helps, or it really encourages you to then dig into what you actually think about it, which I will not speak about here, but it's fun. And actually, another book with a really good ending is Several People Are Typing by Calvin Casselkay. This is a book about a guy who gets stuck inside a Slack channel at his work, and it is told entirely through Slack messages. The format is so good, and it makes this short book even snappier, and yet somehow alongside the main plot, there are so many subplots going on that are so surprising and weird and fun. And when you realize what's happening, you'll go back and be like, oh, that really was happening all along. There's this thing that happens to one woman in particular in this book, which is like one of the funniest twists that I've read all year. And again, no spoilers, but it is like barely remarked upon, while everything else with like the guy who's stuck in Slack just ticks along. It's so good. I love this book. It's another really short, snappy read that I got through in like one sitting, and yet I still think about it all the time. Speaking of books that I think about all the time, Sky Daddy by Kate Falk is a book about a woman who wants to fuck planes. Specifically, she wants to die in a plane crash, which she would think of as a plane choosing her for marriage, but it's also very clear through the rest of how she talks about planes that she wants to fuck the planes. And I love the voice in this book so much. It's like when you have a fantasy story and the people talk in a way to remind you that they're not in our world. Like, you know, they'll say like, oh my gods, or something like that, just to be like this like little reminder. Well, in this book, the main character will do that by reminding you how much she wants to fuck planes. I cannot stress this enough. She's, for example, constantly referring to people by how they look to like a specific kind of plane. Like she'll say like, oh, this person looks exactly like a Boeing 747 or whatever. It's fascinating. And what I really love about this book is how it's obviously so clear that she is an incredibly weird person, and yet still so loved by people around her. Like, she is able to form connections to people, and it is a really meaningful part of the book, even as she continues to go down this spiral, even as you are really there to see this spiral, and like that is the thing that you are kind of compelled by. It somehow manages to be incredibly heartfelt at the same time. Really good, really weird, and the weirdness is so important to it all. I am obsessed with this book. I, again, just have not stopped thinking about it. The next book is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waxberg, and this is the author or the writer of BoJack Horseman, which I don't know anything about. I haven't seen that show, but this short story collection, what I love about it is every single story centers on this theme around love, and in any short story collection there's going to be like some that are more hit and miss than others, but it's the way that that theme is like explored over and over again in different ways every single time, and the way they all tie together is like they are not connected in world building or anything like that. It is just thematic, and I really, really enjoyed it. It doesn't feel cloying at all, and I am a very cynical person, so that was a real accomplishment to me. Weirdly, when I came to take notes on it, I felt like I didn't remember any of the individual stories that much. I just remember like the vibe of it being so good, and so maybe this is one for a reread, or maybe like I kind of just want to preserve that feeling about how like touching it was. Speaking of rereads, this year I reread Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and I previously remember not enjoying it very much, and I thought that I had actually DNF'd it at one point. But then when I reread it, I did remember everything that happened in it, so clearly I didn't, and I don't know why I had this image in my head of like just not enjoying the book very much, because this time around I loved it. This is a book about a group of actors and musicians who travel in post-apocalyptic America. It's pretty famous at this point because again they made a TV show of it, but some of the image, I haven't seen the TV show, so maybe it does this really well, but some of the imagery in the book like just stuck with me so much. And again, like I remembered this from a reread like 10 years ago or something like that. The images of like the airport in the early days of the disaster and how all these people were there, and obviously like no one intends to be at an airport for very long, and then they were stuck there, and how like those early days played out when no one knew what was going on, and then also how it grew into something beyond that is really, really interesting. And then of course like the museum of things that they build at that airport sticks with me so much. I feel like, you know, even as a journalist, a lot of what I want when I'm writing an article is actually like to preserve how things are now so that you can then like look back at them in the future. And I don't know whether that's actually like a real, like that might be egotistical, but like I do think about it and it is like meaningful to me. And so the idea that people would be invested in keeping like little trinkets and especially bits of writing in this story, there's something so tangible about that to me. And of course, like there's also the subplot about the guy who is actually putting together a newspaper of like things that are happening, and that was so fascinating to me. And then of course like the bigger picture of, you know, the theme of survival is not enough and how that plays into it as well. I really, really liked it. I am actually working on, in this class that I mentioned, a post-apocalyptic story, which is why I read this one. And I feel like there's so much here that I want to try and get across in terms of like what is saved and what is worth saving and how people hold on to the past, but in a way that is hopefully developmental about it. Much to think about, in my opinion. Okay, back onto historical fiction, but a lot more recent historical fiction. The Half-Life of Valerie K by Natasha Pulley is set in Soviet Russia. It follows a prisoner who is taken from a gulag to go and do experiments at a nuclear facility, and it's extremely clear that something extremely fucked up is going on. And there's constantly this gritty, horrible mystery where people are getting sick and things are being covered up. And then it's also a love story between this scientist and this completely evil KGB guy, and it somehow works really well. There's some of the most tender writing in this, and it manages to be incredibly intimate without being outright romantic in the simplest sense. And also the whole time you're like, that guy is KGB and is so evil. And that tension is so delicious. I know that Natasha Pulley has written a bunch of other historical fiction, so I am very excited to dig into some more of that. I feel like 2026 is going to be a big year for me of like, wow, I read a lot this year from like authors or series that I'm excited to go back to. So that's always fun. And then another book, which is historical but non-fiction this time, is The Wager by David Grann. And this is about a boat journey where everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and it has my favorite thing about nonfiction, which is like, it is so well paced and follows this incredible narrative arc, and yet like, it's based on true events. And again, as someone who does nonfiction writing, like fitting stories into this structure, there's something so satisfying about it, and I don't know if I can describe it, but seeing it done by other people, and like David Grann is obviously like a master at his craft, it's so satisfying. And the story itself is so compelling, and like there's this guy who, like a young guy who's on the boat who watches the captain kill his friend over something meaningless, and then when everyone mutinies he still goes back to him. And like I thought so much about like a fictionalized story of this, like told from that young guy's perspective, where like you see like him wrestling with that decision, and it's just so fascinating. David Grann also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, which obviously was turned into a Martin Scorsese movie, and Scorsese also has the rights to The Wager, so possibly this could end up being a really interesting movie. Although I still think I would prefer like a fictionalized book of the events, because I think the sort of psychological interiority of some of these characters would be so fun to explore. But the book itself does such a good job of not speculating about how people were feeling, but just laying out the events that happened in a way that makes it so compelling and really makes you think about that yourself, that I enjoyed it a lot, as evidenced by it being on this list. Alright, and then I left for last Illness as Metaphor by Susan Sontag, and I left this for last because if you've gotten this far, I trust you to listen to me talk about something depressing, which is cancer, and specifically how driven insane I am by people talking about cancer and how people talk about it. I was recommended this book by one of my tutors in the novel writing class that I mentioned, because my book is partially inspired by this kind of glorification of cancer patients that I've personally experienced. And it's interesting in this book because Sontag talks actually a lot about like victim blaming and how cancer is seen as a self-inflicted thing, either by something like smoking or like by this idea of like repressing your feelings, which isn't something that I've really experienced or come across. But I don't know if this is because this book was written in the 70s or if it's just like a coincidence that it's not something that I've really heard of. But I kind of feel like there is an argument to say that things have just changed a lot since this book was written, because in the second part, which was written later, it's about the AIDS crisis, and that comes with such an inherent victim blaming because it's mostly a disease that affects queer or poor communities. And I think that cancer actually may have become like a more quote unquote noble disease because of that. And like that idea of like the nobility of suffering is the thing that really bothers me. And so like, even though I didn't feel like everything totally matched with my experience, there was so much in this book that put into words things that I felt for years, like the idea of someone quote unquote battling cancer and why saying that makes it seem inherently violent. And like, you know, if they lose that battle, it seems like a personal failure. And then there was this quote around like calling things cancerous or a cancer, which you can see everywhere from like gaming forums to like leftist politics, that I just want to read straight out because it was so vindicating to me. How to be morally severe in the late 20th century. How, when there's so much to be severe about, how when we have a sense of evil but no longer the religious or philosophical language to talk intelligently about evil. Trying to comprehend radical or absolute evil, we search for adequate metaphors. But the modern disease metaphors are all cheap shots. The people who have the real disease are hardly helped by hearing their disease's name constantly being dropped as the epitome of evil. Only in the most limited sense is any historical event or problem like an illness. And the cancer metaphor is particularly crass. It's invariably an encouragement to simplify what is complex and an invitation to self-righteousness, if not to fanaticism. So yeah, you see why I left this one for last. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I am still figuring out what to do after my last video got so much more attention than I expected or frankly wanted. But I am happy that I got to talk about books for a bit. I intend to keep making weird, short, sideways looks at indie games. I refuse to capitalize, whatever that means. You know, I mean, 20k views is not like by YouTube standards, it's not even a big deal, but it's still like, there are expectations around it and I just am not interested in them. I already know what my next video is going to be, and it's mostly talking about why beach woodlands are weird with a tiny bit of context about Pokemon. So look forward to that, and Happy New Year!